the tipping at food establishments, restaurants these days. How much are you tipping these days? It's a big question.
It really is, yes. So the pandemic and the rise in inflation and cost of living puts the food service industry in a tough spot, keeping prices affordable for their customers while also paying and keeping employees. There are even different schools of thought when it comes to tipping, with some restaurants adopting a tip-free model, while one Calgary restaurant reviewer says tips of up to 30% are being made an option for customers on electronic pay devices.
Okay, so Michael Van Masso is a food economist and associate professor at the University of Guelph and joins us live now via Skype. We're so glad you're here this morning because this tipflation story, Michael, has really been sort of resonating over the past couple of days. And part of it is from this, this survey from Restaurants Canada, finding that when dining out, 44% of Canadians said their tips are higher than before the pandemic. So do you think this is a sort of a sustainable gesture or sort of temporary goodwill from maybe sympathetic customers at this point?
Well, I think it started as temporary goodwill. When restaurants were closed, we knew that they weren't getting as much business. We sort of tipped because there was nobody eating in, and I think we had empathy and we increased tipping. I think now we're seeing, because as you said, this has been a story for a couple of days now, we're seeing people sort of push back a little bit and say, wait a minute, we're getting back. We're also seeing us likely being sensitive to how much we're eating out because of this food inflation. Eating out might be one of the things that we let go first. So I think we're starting to see pushback, and maybe sort of this nudge to higher tipping has gone a step too far.
Mm-hmm. And Professor Van Masso, I've noticed myself when I'm at a restaurant or even at a retail establishment where you don't traditionally sit down, that the point of sale device, they now have at some places a 30% tipping option. I know that this is something called choice architecture. So what's the pros and cons of a restaurant doing this?
Well, yeah, I mean, in economics, we call those nudges, right? We make it easy to do something we'd like them to do, and more difficult, but still possible to do something maybe to tip a little bit less. So these nudges allow us to get a suggestion, this sort of psychological bump, if you will, to suggest how much we tip. And I think we're really starting to see some pushback to that. We're maybe pushing the envelope a little bit too far. And like you said, you've seen 30%, I've seen 30%, and I go, wow. Not only are the checks getting bigger, so 30% is a bigger chunk of money anyway, but this percentage is going up. We're getting sort of that double whammy, and I think people are starting to become sensitive to that.
Yeah, all this talk about tipping, Professor Van Masso, is reminding me of that scene from Reservoir Dogs where they were sitting around the table, kind of talking about how much to tip, et cetera. We won't get into the details of that conversation, but, Mr. Pink didn't want to offer tips. So what do we know about this tip-free model, paying workers a living wage so they're not relying on tips? Customers clearly going to pay more, but does that pay off for restaurants?
Well, we've seen some restaurants do it successfully. We've seen other restaurants sort of move away from it because they've struggled. And while there are some customers who will push back on the no tipping, they feel like it takes control away from them. They feel without evidence that it maybe doesn't improve, that it hurts that it hurts service. But the truth is that it's mostly staff who don't like it when we go away from tipping. Because those are tax-free dollars to a large degree,
right.
and it allows them to feel like they really have control over the quality of the service.
Yeah, and Professor Van Masso, I've also read stories that sometimes when you tip and you're tipping it into a machine, you don't actually know who's actually taking that money. Is it going to your server, your hairstylist? Is it going to the business owner? So you've researched this. How do you like to handle your tipping?
Well, I always ask. It is the truth. My wife tells me I should tip the dog groomer. I've heard people saying you should start tipping the mechanic. I'm not there yet, frankly. But I ask in restaurants, who's getting this tip? How are you sharing it? I'm really conscious of, people in the kitchen create real value in the restaurant and improve my experience, not just the server. And they're not making a lot of money, often less money than the server. So do you tip out? Do you share? Do you share amongst the other servers? So I have a conversation and ask explicitly, and that affects to a degree, what I do in the restaurant.
And really quickly before I let you go, Professor, I can't remember the last time I had cash on me. I generally just, tap, etc. How much has that changed the tipping game as well? Because I can remember, you used to like put $5 under your coffee cup before you got up from a diner or something like that.
Yep.
Now, again, you're getting to that sort of tipping, and then you're tipping on tax, that sort of thing. How has the sort of move away from cash changed things?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. It changes things a little bit. We don't just sort of round up to the nearest bill or whatever. We don't sort of say, oh, just keep the change. But this has been happening for a while. 95% of restaurant transactions, even before the pandemic, were credit card or Interac transactions. So I think it allows them to nudge us. It allows them to do the calculation for us, and maybe has contributed to some of this tip creep as well.
Right.
Gosh, fascinating stuff. All right, Professor Van Masso with the University of Guelph. Really appreciate your time this morning. Take care.